I think there's enough body of literature out there, really documenting weight bias, documenting, the potential disparities in care that patients receive. And so now the pressure is, well, what do we really do about that? And, there's various online seminars and things like that exist, but no one's really evaluated whether these things actually make an impact. So there's some work going on developing curricula for medical students, which I think is important and definitely needs to be done. But in thinking about all the practicing physicians that are out there, how do we bring them into the fold and start having a larger conversation and, adopting some sort of skill building training mechanism really around this. And obesity is not going away, and we need to know how to engage and work with patients and build rapport. And right now, it's something that we never really receive in our training, let alone sort of the general curriculum on weight management is not well taught. And then thinking about all of the communication skills, at least within the US, is a part of the curriculum, but is never really the main focus, or doesn't necessarily seem to share equal weight as the more biomedical topics. And while all of that stuff is very important, I think there also needs to be some amount of equal emphasis placed on communication with patients, because otherwise it'll always be downplayed as this, oh yeah, it's a good thing if you can do that, but never really a focus for people. It's always a question of time and money and all of those things to put together that type of curriculum, but something that myself and one of my colleagues at Hopkins, so she's a huge communications researcher, we've been starting to talk about a little bit of what would that entail and what steps we need to take, and of course all at the very beginning, but I think it's an important area where I need to go to not just say, hey, this exists, but okay, well, let's have a solution, or at least try to create one to improve care. In 2011, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services now have obesity counseling as a covered benefit, but it very specifically stipulates that it has to be in the primary care setting by a primary care provider, either a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant. So it can't be a nutritionist that happens to be in your practice, or a nurse or a counselor. It really has to be the provider. While it's great, I think, to have that as a covered benefit and first really recognizing that this needs to be a service, I don't know that it's necessarily the right group of providers actually delivering this care. And so there's definitely an education gap on both regular content and communications content that needs to be filled in order for that to be effective. And now in the Affordable Care Act, there's provisions to help cover obesity counseling services as well. Those are a little bit more broad, so it's not necessarily has to be the primary care provider. But if more people are being screened and potentially referred to places, then we need providers to refer them to. And there's such a deficit in really competent bariatricians or even evidence-based weight loss centers in the community to really send people to. Again, a lot of good first steps, but I think we need then actually places for people to receive, compassionate care to really help mitigate and support all of their behavior changes. There's a lot of pressure put on primary care physicians, and I think one of the questions is, while delivering in general more compassionate care to everyone, I think is a good thing, but are they really the best ones to be doing the majority of the screening and the counseling and the day-to-day work with patients in really identifying and targeting chronic diseases, whether it's obesity or lipedema or diabetes or what have you, and that it might be better served for a person who has more rapport building skills, has the time to actually take with patients, and that they're working with a physician rather than everything being so physician driven. I think the first step has to be an awareness of the potential impacts of these biases. That for the longest time, the research is really focused on just whether it exists or not. And while that's important first steps, that doesn't really necessarily convince physicians that, well, I may have these attitudes, but if it's not impacting the care that I'm delivering to patients, why does it really matter? And so I think that my study looking at the decreased emotional rapport building between patients and physicians, if the patient was overweight or obese, is really an important step in saying, yes, this does impact the care that you're delivering. But if we start really focusing on quality of care and patient satisfaction, in addition to the hard clinical outcomes, can we really provide a better experience for patients regardless of their personal situation? I often hear comments from my own patients that they've never actually had a physician sit down and talk with them in detail, and to laugh when things are funny, and to give hugs when things are sad. And I think that emotional connection, their expectations sometimes are set so low, because if you've been treated this way your entire life, when someone treats you a little bit nice, you're like, wow, you're great. Where if everyone had a positive experience of what care with your physician, what other relationships should really be like, what your expectations of how you should be treated were set equivalent to what other people experience, then I think that would be more of an impetus to rally together to say, no, I deserve to be treated this way all the time. But unless you have that experience, it's hard to really gauge what your expectations are. I think when patients come in and they have a condition that could have been prevented or better treated through any type of lifestyle behavior, whether it's diet or smoking, that it's really easy to assign blame on that person, that this is your fault, you don't have enough willpower to do X, Y, and Z. For some patients, their main coping mechanism in how they handle stress is food, and that is not really an accepted form of ways to cope. And whether for some people they get sort of that happy release of chemicals in their brain when they eat foods, and then that sort of perpetuates the cycle. A lot of eating disorders on the obesity end of the spectrum, very underdiagnosed, and until really DSM-5, they weren't even recognized as official diagnoses. So I think that all sort of sets up this culture that allows us to blame the patient for lack of willpower. I think physicians a lot of times were taught to really focus on, here's the problem, here's the cause, here's the answer. And that while there's these very sometimes clear pictures of X causes Y causes Z, but asking the question of, well, why does this person do it? And thinking of all of the social and cultural and environmental influences that affect someone's choices. We're never really taught, how do you manage that? We like things to have very clear answers, and when things don't have clear answers and we can't have a ready solution, sometimes we like to ignore that fact. And I think we're now reaching a point in medicine, the understanding and wanting to integrate all of those environmental and social influences are really becoming more important. And so now we're at the point of, well, how do we actually intervene and work with these issues? Should our work as physicians actually expand beyond just the immediate patient-physician relationship and care in the hospital, but thinking about how do we take care of communities? So should we be advocates for healthier foods in the community, actually going out and advocating for populations that sometimes don't have the voice to really come together and advocate for themselves, saying, no, these people have a right to have healthy foods and be able to access them. I think that we're starting to, again, see sort of a cultural shift in medicine of more people being interested in wanting to advocate and enter into that realm, where I feel for a long time thinking about policy has been something that physicians have kind of shied away from, that it's very clear for me my role of I take care of these patients. But now I think we're really pressed to think about the larger issue and how can I take care of all of my patients better, especially if you're embedded within a community. Well, I think it's fascinating to delve into a different cultural framework to really understand, well, what are the motivations behind you doing what you do, and that, to some degree, you'll be an outsider, but then the more empathy that you can really have with a patient, I think that the more likely they are to open up and really explain their lives to you. It was interesting to me in residency, so many people are actually scared to ask that question, why? Because what if I don't know the answer to it? And I think it's okay not knowing the answer sometimes, and even acknowledging, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do, but let me see if I can find out, and let's work with social work, let's work with case management to really try to help find a solution. But unless you ask that, you're never gonna know. And then it's sort of eye-opening of, wow, I didn't realize all of these influences that are coming in, and then sitting down and really working with people to say, okay, well, what do we need to do to help take on this challenge and this challenge and this challenge, which may be totally different than another patient. And starting to better tailor and individualize care is, I think, an exciting opportunity. And then does that make it more meaningful for patients that this plan is really created for you in mind, knowing what your life is like and everything that you're facing, and your own personal preferences and choices. I think all of that factoring in to make it a truly patient-centered experience based on what the patient wants out of it is exciting and a privilege to be involved in.